The USA, UK and Eurozone are all suffering from a huge financial crisis. The real cause of this financial crisis is being concealed from people by the mainstream media. The root cause of our problems right now is our privatized money system. In the USA, UK and Eurozone, we use private money, which is owned actually by the banks, and we have to pay a fee. We pay that fee in the form of interest and compound interest. We in the Western world have a banking system which was invented by the Rothschild dynasty. It's called the fractional reserve banking. In the olden days, once upon a time, banks had to have 100% of everything they lent. For example, if a bank lent 100 thalers, they had to actually have 100 gold thalers to get any interest. The modern banking system means that banks don't have to have the money before they lend it. Instead of 100% capital reserve, they now only need a 3% capital reserve. That means they can lend 100 gold thalers, for example, when they only have 3 gold thalers. They can charge interest on those 100 gold thalers they don't have, even though they only have lent somebody 3 gold thalers. There are now so many private banks lending so much money that it makes up our entire money supply in Europe, the USA and UK. All this money comes with interest and compound interest. Banks can use mathematical models to calculate when that interest and compound interest is going to become too big for any economy or society to be able to repay. They can put input variables on interest and money supply to calculate more or less exactly when societies are going to break down under the burden of paying these interest debt payments. The collapse usually happens after 10 or 15 years. The euro was only introduced in the Eurozone in the year 2000, and already the interest and the debt on this privatized money system is so large that the Eurozone is being pulverized in an attempt to repay it. The Federal Reserve in the USA was privatized in 1913, and in very few years, in 1931, the USA was in the same position. There was a banking crisis which hid the fact that the interest had reached such a high amount that the US economy could no longer sustain the interest payments. The Rothschilds did not only invent this modern fractional reserve banking system with 3% capital reserves, they also invented the modern media. Remember the famous story of how the Rothschilds managed to make so much money during the Battle of Waterloo because they had an information edge even then. Today, the mainstream media still conceals from people the true nature of our financial system. It conceals from people the fact that it has been privatized. When we use dollars, pounds or euro coins and notes, we are using private money. Central banks, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England and the European Central Bank lend commercial private banks these notes and coins. The banks use these notes and coins for their day-to-day transactions, but the money is actually controlled by the private banks. The very nature of our money supply means that it is set to grow indefinitely, and we are heading for inflation and hyperinflation. It doesn't matter how big our money supply is, if we have to pay 7 or 8 or 10% interest on it, then the central banks and the banks have to create 7 or 8 or 10% more money just to pay that interest. We were given false reasons for the current crisis. We are told it's a banking crisis, a subprime crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, but really it's a crisis of our money supply. The bottom line is the interest payments are growing exponentially all the time. They're growing far faster than our economies. When private people are too poor to pay the interest rates on their mortgages, on products that they buy in supermarkets or whatever, then banks get governments to collect the interest payments through the tax system. The subprime crisis, banking crisis, when people could no longer afford the mortgage payments, becomes a sovereign or national debt crisis through the bailouts given to banks. The governments then take over the payment of the interest on outstanding loans on behalf of private people who can no longer afford all these interest payments. The subprime crisis, when people are too poor to pay the interest on their mortgages, becomes a sovereign debt crisis when the governments take over these mortgage payments and pay to the banks the interest using the pool of tax money which is being collected by governments. Eventually there's no money left in the real economy. Economies are set on a path of austerity as governments cut more and more of the budget to finance these interest payments, and on the path of inflation. Central banks have to start printing money to pay the interest on the national debt. Economies are literally starved of money as a means of transaction or trade. Trade grinds to a halt not because there are no products and not because there's no demand. Trade grinds to a halt because of the lack of affordable public money to pay or make these transactions. The destruction of economies suits banks. They have lost no money after all when they made all their loans. They only had a 3% capital reserve. The rest was just digits printed or typed into their computers, but they're getting interest all the time. During a boom, they make a fortune through the interest payments, and in a bust, they can clean up on all the assets. Because the globalists know when these busts are going to occur, when the burden of interest is going to be too great for a population to bear, they have plenty of time to plan for pandemics, world wars, and other ways of eliminating the impoverished, rebellious, angry population. People who no longer have any pensions, savings, or jobs might start to ask questions and find out what is really going on. The globalists plan wars and pandemics to cover up the real cause of the collapse of society. The first global financial boom and bust was followed by the First World War. The second global boom and bust was followed by the Second World War. Hitler's main backers were actually bankers. Now we're in the third financial global boom and bust cycle, and the globalists are preparing for the Third World War, involving plans to trigger a conflict in Syria or Iran. What is the solution? The solution is we have to press for a sound public money supply. Money has to be put in circulation without this hidden interest charge. This is what happens in China. China has a state bank which puts into circulation public money. This money flows to business startups, to entrepreneurs. This is the secret for China's phenomenal growth. By keeping wages low and exporting, China has been able to build up a huge pool of foreign currency reserves. China is now in a position to actually buy up all the USA, the UK, and the Eurozone. It is not just in a position to buy up all our economies, it is also in a position to become the major currency in a new one world currency. The Eurozone has the additional problem that the single currency has made the southern European countries uncompetitive. Countries like Greece, Spain, and Italy have become deindustrialized because they can no longer sell their products on the world market under the euro regime. In the past few years, the Greek government has borrowed billions of euros from Germany over the Eurozone central bank system. This is the way they have managed to finance their imports. It has meant that Greece has got deeper and deeper into debt to foreign creditors. The Greek debt problem was made worse by a credit default swap deal managed by Goldman Sachs. Figures were manipulated to suggest that Greece was more in debt than it actually was. This is the subject of an investigation now in Greece. Greece's sovereign debt problem became the Eurozone debt problem. Bailouts were arranged in violation of the Lisbon Treaty, which took tax money from all of Europe to make the interest payments on Greece's enormous debt. The solution is to put the Greek economy through a managed insolvency and to allow Greece to reintroduce the drachma and become competitive again. The bailouts, Eurobonds and the European Stability Mechanism are just different ways to collect the tax money from the people of Europe to pay the banks and their shareholders. The European Stability Mechanism is particularly sinister. It allows an unaccountable and unelected body to take whatever tax money it wants from all the people in the Eurozone. It spells taxation without representation. Europe is turning back the clock. We are becoming a feudal country or collection of countries once more. A lawless rich clique are literally robbing the people and using a centralized bureaucracy and police state to collect taxes. A lawless super rich clique is robbing the people through the fractional reserve banking system fraud and by creating a centralized bureaucracy and police state to collect the taxes to make the interest payments on our privatized money system. The solution is for us all to get together and demand public money, sound money, money without this hidden interest and compound interest fee which is destroying our economies. The solution is also in Eurozone, at any rate, to allow countries like Greece, Spain or Italy to leave the Eurozone in a managed way, minimizing the disruption. This will allow the countries to regain competitiveness, add jobs and regain their prosperity. None of the political parties, none of the media and none of the major figures in business are willing to represent the people's interests in this matter. It's up to you to make your voice heard. Most people have to work 40 or more hours now a week to make ends meet. If people spent a fraction of that time reforming the money system, they would then be able to finally enjoy the fruits of all their effort.